Women make up nearly 50% of all gamers, yet only a small percentage of women play esports professionally. It's time we figure out how to change that. The Knights want to empower women to build their esports empire. Along with our partner PNC Bank, we are adamant about creating a more equitable future for gamers. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, so we'll be tackling the issue from all angles, featuring insights from a variety of subject matter experts and professionals. I'm Kat DeShieldsman with the Knights. Welcome to the Women in Esports podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second episode of Season 2 of the Women in Esports podcast with Pittsburgh Knights, presented by PNC Bank. We are so thrilled to have you here with us, digitally, of course, and I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Dr. Jenna Drenten to the show today. She has conducted numerous studies about the gamer girl. I'm sure you all know gamer girl, that term is prevalent throughout the gaming and esports industry, but she's conducted market research talking about why this is, what are some of the challenges that women face when it comes to being engaged with or wanting to be a part of the gaming industry, and what solves there are, solutions, challenges, opportunities to overcome, to understand, to relate with, to make esports and gaming a more equitable place for everyone. So thank you so much, Jenna, for joining the show. I would love to learn a little bit more about you and what you do at Loyola.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am an associate professor of marketing at Loyola University Chicago in the Quinlan School of Business. I study gender and identity and digital consumer culture. So gaming fits right in the middle of all of that, particularly as more and more games are bound by internet experiences and the experiences in particular of women in those spaces. And yeah, that's my research, and I've had a long interest in understanding how the marketplace functions from a more anthropology and sociology perspective.
That's fascinating. I love that. So you said that gaming is a perfect industry to research. So what led you to starting to studying, gaming and how women fit into the space?
It was a couple things, actually. Part of it was I grew up gaming and then at some point stopped. And part of my interest in studying gaming from an academic perspective was figuring out why. Why did I stop doing something that I loved as a young kid and as a teen? And why did I fall out of it? And then I saw my younger sibling and other young people that were playing and wondered at what point are they potentially going to stop playing. So that was one piece of it. And then another is there was a statistic that came out that talked about essentially when we compare men and women, which is a limiting view of gender, but for the purpose of the statistic said, men and women have actually reached parity or representation in the gaming industry. So as far as gamers, that women are about 49% of the gaming industry of players. And I thought, where are they? Because I'm not seeing 49%. And so what's happening here that this is not visible to other people looking into this industry? And then I have a sort of happenstance that a colleague of mine at Western Michigan called me up one day and said, what do you know about gaming and gamer girls? Would you want to study this? And I said, as a matter of fact, it's funny you should mention that because I've been thinking a lot about this. So it worked out that we were able to collaborate on these projects.
That's awesome. And there's been a couple of papers that you have put out. Can you run us through the titles and just like a summary of what each one kind of dives into?
Yeah, of course. So one of them is on gamer girls in particular and navigating this subculture of inequality. And that one really dove into trying to understand, what does the term gamer girl mean? It's something that's often taken for granted that people are just like, oh yeah, we know. But in research, we know you don't know until you study it and really understand where it's coming from. So that one really looked into how different levels of the marketplace play a role in creating these inequities in the gaming community. So whether it's one-on-one consumer experiences or in the shopping experience. So a lot of women in our study said, I go into GameStop and I try to buy a game, and immediately the employee is like, oh, are you buying for your boyfriend? Are you here for your dad? Are you buying for your little brother? And so there's these sort of microaggressions that happen within the marketplace that came out of what's representative of a gamer girl not belonging in this community. So that's one research paper. And then another one was a more conceptual piece looking at sort of the history of gaming and gaming as a gendered subculture. So a lot of the research to date looks at how representation takes place within the game itself. So like Lara Croft Tomb Raider and what gamers call one of my favorite terms that I learned in these projects is boob physics. So it's essentially like there's no way that a woman could look this way naturally, but because of digital technology, we can make them look at whatever fantastical way we want to. And so we said that's great to understand how women's bodies are represented in the games and those sort of things, but we're actually more interested in the experience of gaming and how that's a gendered experience, and where we started in gaming from arcades and this sort of like leisure activity to now esports and a very monetized business model of being able to build a career out of this. And that at every step of the way and every iteration from arcade gaming to obviously in recent years Gamergate to now with huge arenas being built around esports, that gender plays a huge role in that, and how we define masculine leisure, and where women as traditionally more feminine individuals fit into that.
No, that's fantastic. Gosh, you hit on so many points. I wish we had time to unpack them all, but we're gonna try and get through as much as possible, y'all. So, but I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about how people assume what gamer girl means, because I know I had my assumptions on what gamer girl meant until I found out it had a wildly negative connotation to it, and I'm like, maybe I don't want to call myself that. So, can you, if according to your research and what you found, what is the definition of a gamer girl?
That's a great question, and it does vary who you're talking to. So largely in our research, what we found is gamer girl. It's affiliated with a very negative connotation, and the best way to describe it is a very sexualized connotation, where it's women who are just trying to play games to meet men and to try to get boyfriends, and that they're posing in sexy ways with a controller in their mouth, and that they don't actually know how to play. So that's more descriptive than it is a definition, but that's sort of the visual imagery that comes to mind when we think of this negative connotation around a gamer girl, that it's someone who is not a quote unquote real gamer. And what in our research we find is real gamer equals man. That tends to be the litmus test, and which we know is not true, but that seems to be the default. And so one of the things, to your point, that a lot of women do claim to be gamer girls because it's a way of empowering and taking that term back and saying, this is actually, we are going to own this word and you can't weaponize it against us. One of the things, that is a very obvious way that this field is gendered is there's no such thing as gamer guy, right? That it's just gamer girl. There's and so by default that is the second sex, that this is like you don't belong here. So it's a way for this masculine dominance to manifest as weaponizing the term gamer girl. So it falls in line with how we see this in other ways, like, oh, you throw like a girl. So it's very much this like a girl mentality captured in one phrase.
No, that's awesome insight. Thank you so much for that definition. So you've level set the rest of the conversation with that, and I'm super excited. Y'all, this is going to be amazing. I can't even begin to express how excited I was when I was reading your work, and the writing of your co-authors, just because you really take a deep look into the origins of some of the problems that women are facing and continue to face in the gaming industry. And it is so important, to understand where this stems from to properly create solutions or address the problem. So to continue with the gamer girl definition for just a moment, where did the term originate from? In your research, you tied it with Gamergate. Can you expand on that just a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in the gaming community will be familiar with Gamergate for sure. But if not, essentially, and there's a lot of moving parts to it, but and some key actors. But I'll break it down to the big picture of there was some controversy around how one individual became prevalent in the gaming community who was a woman, and there were accusations made around her essentially sleeping her way to the top. And that ties into this gamer girl sort of mentality that a way that women are kept out of the gaming community is to sexualize them, and we see that in the games themselves, but we also see that in gameplay, that it's fine if you are a woman and you want to be here. So this is essentially what Gamergate said. You can be here, but you need to be here for the service of men. That you need to be hot. You need to like play by our rules. You need to look the way we want you to look. And that's fine, but don't try to like upset what we've built here, which is a highly misogynistic, highly patriarchal community. And so Gamergate really evolved out of a pushback against women gaining power in this community, and the challenges with what happens all the time of sharing power, when a marginalized group suddenly becomes more powerful, that the group that is dominant is going to say no thank you, we are going to find new ways to keep you down. And Gamergate was a part of that was very public and visible, so it became a hashtag on Twitter, and it was essentially a movement saying women don't belong in this community. It's a much more visible way of manifesting this gamer girl identity, and so that's where it became sort of mainstream, this gamer girl term, because we saw it so much on Twitter, on Reddit, on 4chan, on these social media channels, emerging as a weaponized term to say these gamer girls don't belong here. And so it was a way to collectively say, you are the other, and you now, we don't want you in our group. Even though, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, that the our group isn't really true, because many women are gamers. Like there's a ton of women that are actively gaming, but they're doing it in cloaked ways because they're trying to protect themselves from the harassment that they might get, as evident through Gamergate.
No, it's it's a sobering thought, to be sure, and we'll definitely dive into how women have to hide their identities in order to feel like they can even participate as either a player or sometimes professionally too. So we'll get into that. Absolutely want to come back and talk about that. But to go into to go into your process just a little bit, can you share how you with your co-authors, how you collected your data? How did you identify, the women that you talked to, and then what kind of a process did you take around writing these papers?
Yeah, so I'm a qualitative researcher, and a lot of my research is all about immersing yourself in the field and really understanding not just individual experience, not people as numbers. So it's understanding lived experiences rather than maybe a survey or an experiment might. So We did depth interviews with over 20 women who identify as gamers at various levels, and they all play various different games. We started by essentially just posting posters around different gaming stores in our communities and asking if people would be interested in talking to us. And people were, because they're passionate about having their voices heard. And so we sat down and would have interviews with individuals and ask them a series of questions about their experiences. And one of the things that was really interesting is sort of as the interview would unfold, you saw our participants sort of processing experiences that they've had. So we might ask, have you ever had any negative experiences? And a person might say, oh no, it's all been great. I love gaming. It's an amazing community. Everyone's wonderful. Well, this one time this guy, said something to me, was like, people say go back to the kitchen all the time. And sometimes my team will make us lose because they don't want a woman to win on the team. But no, everything's been great. And so it's interesting what as gamers, people learn to code as harassment or negative experiences and not to code in that way. And what becomes just, oh, that's just part of gaming versus that's actually a gendered harassment taking place. So we would ask these questions. We've also recently started collecting some data via Twitch and observational research on Twitch live streaming. And that's a newer iteration. And then we've done a lot of historical research. So we, collect a ton of media sources throughout the last 2 decades to better understand how the evolution of the industry has been as far as how gaming is covered in the media, because that has a huge impact on individual consumers' perceptions and players' perceptions of gaming as a community, of seeing what's reflected back to them. And then our last thing is kind of mapping that onto sort of a timeline of the industry itself. And when one thing that I have found really interesting is a lot of our participants talk about an uptick in sort of misogynistic activities in the gaming community when big games that are sports oriented, like Madden, started coming out. And they said, before then it was this like respite for nerd culture, and it was a place that we could go and be safe. And then it was like all these like highly misogynistic jock guys started playing video games. And then like all of a sudden it wasn't this safe space for us, which maybe, isn't entirely the full story, but it's interesting to see how certain game releases happen, how industry changes occur, and the timeline of that, how that maps on to increasing sort of harassment or gendered experiences over time.
No, that's a very interesting point. I didn't even think about that, because it used to be, if you were a gamer, then, that has a whole bunch of stereotypes attached to it in and of itself, but you probably got teased in school. This,
Right.
if you identified as a gamer. So that with just the different games that are coming out and the different populations that are coming in that are attached to those, that's fascinating. Wow, I can't. That's going to be amazing.
And our understanding, our understanding of science in general. So early research on gaming actually said women or young girls are not good at gaming because their dexterity isn't as good, and their cognitive ability to like have good hand-eye coordination that you would need to be able to look at the TV and then the controller and the arcade video game, that there were multiple studies that said that young boys are just naturally biologically better at gaming. And so that then influences, even though it's false science, influences perceptions of the gaming community over time of who is a good gamer, who is a real gamer, who should be playing games. And we see that in traditional sports as well, that it's sort of like, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon and having to sort of break in under the guise of being a man because she wasn't supposed to be there. And so we see this in multiple different subcultures and fields. Gaming is one that we were super interested in studying because there is no physical ability involved. So that claim can't be made. Whatever claim that is, that there should be no differences as far as how good you are able to be, as far as a sex-based conversation.
No, exactly. Because esports, a lot of people, organizations, they're touting it, and it's true. Exactly what you said. You don't have to have any real, physical ability like the same way a football player or a soccer player has to have. So in a way, it's a great equalizer because everybody has a chance, right? As long as you
Right.
know how to play a solid internet connection, which not everybody has, but it's a lot more accessible than a lot of other
Hmm.
traditional sports ever will be. So the fact that there's false science around girls can't move their thumbs as fast is just crazy to me.
Yeah.
That's wild. But thank you for that. I did, as an extension of your research process in your papers, I did see a paragraph where you say your study is rooted in social dominance theory. Can we spend a little bit of time discussing what that is and how it pertains to your research?
Yeah, social dominance theory is a lot about power dynamics. It's a lot about trying to take power from other individuals, and that there would be considered a particular socially dominant group that sort of makes the rules. They have the resources, and any sort of challenge to that would be seen as an attempt to take power from the dominant group. And so within gaming, we use social dominance theory as looking at sort of the masculine nature of the gaming community and the field of gaming, and how social dominant, aka men, become the dominant group in that community, and how that manifests in various ways, from, as I mentioned before, the consumer level, from gameplay, to how games are designed. So what gets presented on the screen as you're playing, because social dominance manifests in the industry itself, as we have game designers and programmers and the artwork designers for the boxes themselves and how games are marketed. And then also, as I mentioned before, at the sort of retail and shopping level. So at all of these different, as we say, marketplace actors, at all these marketplace levels that we see social dominance manifesting, as it's being catered to this masculine ideal, because that's the perceivably dominant social group in the gaming culture.
No, that's a thank you for that. And I did want to read one of the quotes you're talking about. What was it, marketing actors that you just referenced?
Yeah.
Something that very interesting was that advertisement. So when it comes to gaming, so quote, using stereotypical assumptions from previous sex-based gaming studies, the male-oriented advertisement used words like intense combat and battle, while the female-oriented advertisement used words like build relationships and create a community. To the author's surprise, such dichotomous, did I say that right? Is that how you say that? I
Yeah.
think, okay, woohoo! Dichotomous gender stereotyped advertising was not as effective as expected. Instead, gamers prefer high quality, multi-dimensional games transcendent of gender-based stereotypes. So it's prevalent everywhere, like you just said, from the design aspect of it right down to in-store experiences, down to the way that games are marketed or positioned for certain people. So I do want to spend just a little bit of time on that quote about gamers preferring high quality multi-dimensional games, and it doesn't have anything to do with gender. Um, how did you come across that information? That's fascinating, because one would think, and oh, this game is made for women, or this type of game would
Hmm.
appeal more to men, so it's like, I don't know, sometimes people are like, "Oh yeah, you're a gamer, so what do you play, like Animal Crossing and Candy Crush?" And I'm like, "No, I play Blasphemous and Call of Duty. What do you play?" You know? So
Hmm.
I think it's a very real thing that a lot of women go through, especially if they like men games or games
Right.
made for men.
And that's absolutely. And that goes back to this like idea of what a real gamer is, that the perception is a real gamer are the one that they are the ones that are playing Call of Duty and Battlefield and Grand Theft Auto and these like highly often bloody, extend from offline what we have coded as masculine activities. So if you take things like Call of Duty and Battlefield, that those experiences of going to war are coded as masculine activities offline, and then they get coded as that in these online multiplayer games as well. And so a couple things that as you were talking came up. So I love that you mentioned that people come up to you and say, "Oh, you play Candy Crush," because even in my research, I've had other scholars say, "Well, what do why is this important research? Like, girls are gamers; they all play Candy Crush." And again, I'm like, but that's not the point. That's saying like, well, yeah, you can play, but only if you play these games that are like cooking oriented, or you're taking care of like some animal and keeping them alive, or building, a home, or doing something, dressing your character. That if it's something that's bloody, gory, intense in those ways, that's not a space for you. But that also is what real gaming is. So you can't be both. And so there is this like then pressure, just like you said, well, no, I play these games, this pressure on women to grandstand and to say, I'm going to prove that I belong here. Whereas men don't have that. They don't have that same default pressure where one of my favorite quotes from our interviews, and it's actually in multiple iterations came up, but one person said, when you're a woman, people always ask you, do you play video games? Whereas if you're a man, they say, what games do you play? And out of the gate, it's just assumed that as a man that you could play games, like that's default understood. And I mean, we do it in a lot of fields, but it's the sports example of like, oh, you like baseball, like name the winner of the World Series in 1948. Or
Exactly.
and so there's this added burden on female gamers to prove their expertise, their belonging, their knowledge of these highly gendered video games. And marketing has contributed to that because it is marketed toward a very masculine ideal. And so, you do have, as I mentioned earlier, these like boob physics and these fantastical things and these, gory imagery and really intense, you know, photos and things like that and illustrations, um, the rhetoric that's used. And a lot of the women in our research said, but we want that too. like we just want to play video games. We're not trying to be like girls in gaming. Like, we're not trying to be gamer girls. We're just trying to be gamers. And we just want to play these same games that everyone else is playing. And we want to boost our, kill ratio and our, scores. And we want to do the same thing. So we're not asking for the games to be different. We're asking for our experience to be different.
That is powerful. That's a tweetable quote if I ever heard one. And it's definitely something I can get behind, because even like working in the industry, it's like I'm here, I'm working in video games. Like, oh, so you work here, but do you play games? Yeah, I do. So I absolutely understand. And, everything that you're saying, I know that it's validating to a lot of women who are in the space, and it's me just listening to you reading your work. I'm like, I feel seen in terms of like, yes, this is exactly it. I didn't have the vocabulary or, the terms, or even the wider context to understand all of the different factors that are adding to or contributing to the way that I feel, as a woman who
Hmm.
plays games, but y'all, like, the links will be included below. So spend some time after listening to this podcast, reading Dr. Drenton's research. I promise it is validating and so, so insightful in many different ways. So you got a fan in me, got a whole fan.
And that's the point
um,
of academic research, is to make voices heard. I mean, it is to like give life to these voices, and to really understand dynamics, not at a surface level, but like deeply rooted in the socio-historic perspective of how we got to be in this place and how we can do better.
Mm. No, that's powerful. I love that. So that's an interesting take on academic research. I guess I never really thought about why academic research was a thing, but well, other than like, hey, here's some things that we explored and here's what we found, but from like a validation standpoint, be like, hey, these are underrepresented or marginalized voices. We're tapping into spaces that nobody's looked at before just to jiggle things around and see what makes things go. So that's
Hmm.
awesome. Uh,
And
so
not from
in
a commercial perspective, I'll add. So it's not a, like, a lot of research that's done, market research, is driven by organizations that have a vested financial interest in the outcome. So if a gaming company was like, we did studies on women's experiences, oh, everyone, they love what we're doing and we're going to keep marketing video games exactly as we are, that there is some bias in that, because there's a financial vested interest in the outcomes of these studies. Whereas academic research is truly for the insights, that it is for understanding these voices of individuals, not beholden to any sort of conglomerate or media company or marketer.
hmm, no, that I love that. Thank you for expounding. Um, so in your studies, what were some of your most surprising findings? Was there anything that you were just like, huh, wow, never would have expected that?
Yeah, I think overall, one of my most surprising findings is how, I guess I'm not surprised by how powerful women are. Like, I knew that, but I am surprised by the strategies that they use to cope with harassment, how those things get turned against them. So I think I was not expecting, so for instance, in some of our research, we talk about things like grandstanding, where it's like you kind of have to prove yourself, or self-policing. So women will say, like, if I'm playing with guys in person, like, I won't wear lipstick, I won't wear makeup. Like, I try to kind of like hide myself a bit to not be this like sexualized gamer girl, so that they can't say that that's what I am. If I'm playing online, I turn my mic off. So that people can't tell that I'm a girl, because the moment they find out, that then I get harassed. I change my avatar. That there are ways that sort of women have learned to navigate this space in a way that is safe and comfortable. And, but by doing that, that it actually contributes to the masculine dominance of the field. So it makes us think women aren't playing because we don't see them and we don't hear them, because their mics are off and their avatars are different. Uh, or they can't be who they really truly are, or they feel like they have to prove themselves all the time, and men put that pressure on women. So I think one of my most surprising findings is just how it's sort of like two steps forward, one step back, all the time, where it's women are pushing up against the sort of misogyny and masculine dominance in gaming, and then men are uh, are able to sort of turn that back and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, then prove that you're good at gaming. We'll let you be here, but if you're good enough. And that's just tokenistic and not true, because there's always going to be another hoop to jump through. So I think overall, that was one of my biggest surprising things, was how hard it is to change a deeply rooted field, in this like deeply rooted misogyny in the field.
Yeah, no, and that leads me to another quote from your study that I would like to share. It's like, by not being allowed to ascend the social hierarchy, need my glasses because I'm squinting hard. By not being allowed to ascend the social hierarchy within their respective gaming communities, these women experience feelings of powerlessness and are relegated to subordinate social roles. While many of these negative experiences are limited to online interactions, women are also exposed to the potential for offline harassment. I think that that's an interesting point and one that's very important to speak to because a lot of people, myself included, honestly, and this goes back to your point that you mentioned earlier about how when you were talking to the different women that were in your study, how it was like, oh yeah, gaming's great, I love it. Yeah, no, it's fine. But oh yeah, that was one time, but that doesn't matter. And it's just how you, I guess, compartmentalize some of the toxicity that happens because it's just so frequent, it's so normal. You just kind of, that's just part of it. But offline harassment, that I think that's something that isn't discussed frequently. And a lot of people don't think that the toxicity that women face in gaming spills over to real life. Can you share some stories from the women who you spoke to about some of the offline, what that looks like?
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of it is potentially seemingly more mundane, where, as I mentioned previously, women talk about going to try to shop for video games in person and being questioned of why they're there, who they're shopping for. It couldn't possibly be them. And so we see these offline microaggressions that serve to keep women out of this field, because if you're constantly questioned of why you're at a gaming store, or a gaming convention. A lot of women talked about their experiences of going to cons and other offline events and immediately being sexualized, harassed, whooped at, being questioned of why they're there, where their boyfriend is, who they're there with. They couldn't possibly have just come on their own or with other women. And so we see those offline experiences there. And I'll share, and this is in one of the articles, one of the worst experiences that a participant revealed to us is that she had started gaming online with a team and met a guy that she really connected with and became good friends with. And then they met up to game in person. And she was sexually assaulted in person by this person that she met online, who she thought was like a safe, friend in the gaming community. And, that is an anecdotal example, but one that I think probably is not out of the ordinary for women in their experiences of this harassment that takes place online. Is a microcosm of the harassment that takes place offline. And even though today a lot of games are mediated by the internet, and so you're on a mic and a headset and having that experience, that a lot of the gaming, especially at younger ages, takes place face to face. And if you're not welcomed into these face to face communities and not given the opportunity to gain that social status and gain the knowledge and the sort of inroads, then that's where we see a lot of these younger women dropping out of gaming, because they're pushed out of these face-to-face spaces and sort of throw up their hands and say what we call acquiescence, where it's like the boys will be boys sort of mentality, and like, it is what it is and I can't change it. And me, one person, am not powerful enough to combat this constant harassment.
No, that's very real. And I know that there's a lot of women that have probably held experiences like that in them. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Because there isn't really a place to go to talk about that without losing serious credibility, possibly public ridicule. And I mean, even in some organizations, if there isn't, an internal structure that can handle, like, hey, my colleague or this influencer, whoever, at a convention, at a tournament, whatever, if there isn't a place for women to go to, it's not going to be said. So
Hmm.
For those who are listening, I would like to take a moment, and if you are facing harassment, if you feel unsafe, please don't not say anything. Find a way to tell somebody what it is that you're experiencing. And if you're not a woman, don't sit by idly if you see somebody being harassed, if they're uncomfortable. We're all humans at the end of the day. And it doesn't matter what games you play. It doesn't matter how good you are at them. You know, be kind and be a decent human being. And if you see or witness toxic behavior, period, but especially if it is in the form of harassment, sexual harassment, whatever, do not sit idly by, because doing so contributes to the problem. So just wanted to put
Yeah.
that out there. We'll include some resources below, just in case you don't feel like you have a safe avenue to talk to anybody that's in your immediate circle. We'll pull some links, some organizations that you can go to, that provides a safe space to help you, one, address the problem, and two, get the help and healing that you need. If you have gone through this and this is something that you're carrying, it's not anything that I would wish on anybody, and it's certainly not acceptable. So you're seen, you're heard, you're loved if you're listening to this podcast. And we'll include some resources for you below. But thank you, Jenna.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about what is lost. You went into this a little bit, including your story where you took a step back and you stopped gaming because you're like, this is
Hmm.
not fun. Like, they're being jerks. So what is lost when women have to have a tough skin or hide their
Hmm.
identities or develop these coping mechanisms to exist in a space that's not welcoming? What is lost to the women who have to do it, and then what's lost for the industry at large?
Yeah, so much. And I just want to say thank you for that, sharing the resources, because it is such a serious problem with harassment and assault in the community. So what is lost when women have to sort of veil themselves or code themselves in ways that align with masculine dominance in this gaming community is like being a multifaceted woman. So I think that um, the perception is you can be a gamer and you can be a woman in gaming, but you need to act like a man. You need to have a thick skin. You need to play, like trash talk and be able to take it and give it. And you need to put up with the sexualized jokes and derogatory comments and like you need to do that. And if that is your way of manifesting your identity as a woman, that's fine. But there's a lot of ways to be a woman. And in gaming, we're boxing people in to say, you can belong here, but only if you act like a masculine, our traditional sense of what we perceive as masculine. And so we're losing what it essentially women can belong, but they can't be women. So they
Mhm.
can be women that act like men. And so we're losing a lot of dynamism and this like dynamic meaning of what it means to express your gender and to be who you are fully and authentically, and that you can play video games and you can dress any way that you want, and you can be interested in multiple other hobbies that are maybe in contrast to what we perceive as like someone who is a gamer. And so by boxing people in and sort of pushing them out as well, even if it's inadvertent, that we're losing the dynamic sort of uniqueness that gaming could be, where it's not just coded as one type of person. I mean, that you mentioned it earlier. It used to be sort of nerd culture, and it was this
Yeah.
perception of like, a nerdy guy who's like just sitting at, in his basement alone, eating pizza all day and chips, and so there are gaming stereotypes in general. And that has expanded, and now's the time to expand it even further to include what it means not only to be a woman in gaming, but to express gender in gaming, and what it means to be trans and non-binary, and that there's a whole gamut of how individuals can express their gender, and that should have a place in gaming, where you don't have to be fit into a box. And then on the industry side of it, certainly we see reflected where women that are programmers and illustrators and game designers, marketers on the industry side have faced uphill battles of building inroads in the industry as well, because it is a sort of boys club, and it's this toxic, many gaming departments and organizations are these sort of like Nerf balls being thrown at your head, and we're gonna like talk about our antics of the night before, and that women have faced challenges in that. And on the design side, then you're missing opportunities to reach an entirely new market. So it's not about creating games for women, it's about creating really creative, dynamic, interesting games that might appeal to a vast audience of people, and not just creating for this one type of stereotypical gamer that we have in our heads.
No, that is powerful insight. I love it. Especially, the fact that you went into detail about like some of the microaggressions, that people might experience, so I mean, even like the whole Nerf ball thing being thrown, or just like bah, and it's like, this is just the company culture, this is what everybody does, and it's normalized, but that's, you shouldn't have to duck and cover every 10 minutes just because somebody thinks it's amusing to throw stuff at you. So, and that leads me to my next question. A lot of what you have said and your research, it reveals, like, to me, the heart of the issue when it comes to why there is a lack of female representation in gaming and esports. So in your opinion and insight and what you've seen, what are some tangible steps that can be taken to turn this around?
Absolutely. That's a very hard question. I and my co-authors and I have grappled with this a lot. Of every time we kind of get into this like depression point of like what hope is there? And I think a couple things. One is women are not victims. That like one thing that I would like to make clear in this podcast and in general is like, while it seems that women are not the dominant group in gaming, they are also not victims. That they are powerful and belong, and it's not because they are gaining acceptance from the men. So often we position it as like men are letting women in, and that still allows the power to sit with men. And the goal isn't to be allowed to exist in the space. I like to think of it as like lowest hanging fruit is like presence. You are there, and then participation, like you're actually allowed to play. But we want to get to that point of power where like women actually are like powerful in this community. And there are so many from everyday experiences, the young girl that's gaming with her friends at school and able to show them the latest cheat codes or whatever it is, that is power. So it's not, we tend to think of power as like, oh, the CEO of a gaming company is a woman, and so now we've made it. And actually power manifests at such other levels, and those are the ones that are going to enact change. That it's not necessarily the CEO, that it's going to be everyday experiences of women in resistance. So women are not victims, that we are powerful and powerful in this field. Collective action is a great way forward. So I think that, the pushback against Gamergate was a great example of that, where it was meant to really bully women and to get them out of the community, but it became a lightning rod for women to coalesce around action and around collective action, where it's this idea of being stronger together, and that it's not just individual one-off experiences of, well, I haven't been harassed, so it's fine, but rather our community needs to change. And I think the last thing is that it's not incumbent on women to be the only ones making changes. So just as you said, with the issues of assault and harassment, if you see something, say something. Like that, it is not the victim, and or women are not victims, but it is not the responsibility of the group who is not in power to change the dynamics. That it is the responsibility of everybody in the community to really pull cultural change up from like the bootstraps and really make those changes. So it's not the responsibility solely on women, nor women gamers. That this is a microcosm of bigger cultural issues happening. And so the more inroads that we can make collectively for empowerment and change and equity and equality from a gender perspective overall, the better for subcultures like gaming.
Exactly. So you heard it. It's going to take everybody, to make a meaningful shift in terms of access and equality in gaming. And that's for women, that's for underrepresented communities, that's for anybody. So this isn't a somebody else problem. This is all of our problems. And there's definitely a lot that any one of us can do in our own circle of influences to advance this very, very, very important cause. Because even if you're a man and you're like, I'm chilling, everything's fine. What if you had a sister, a niece, a cousin, who was just as excited about gaming and she was being put through the ringer? Like, probably wouldn't stand for it. So just a little bit of empathy, a little bit of kindness goes a long way. And together we can all make a meaningful change, to make gaming as reflective of the diverse fabric as the player base. There's a lot of different folks
Right.
out there. That's the cool thing about gaming. This is why I love gaming. But Jenna, thank you so, so, so much for spending, your morning with us for this podcast. This has been amazing and healing for me in so many ways, getting to learn and chat with you. How can people learn more about you or follow your work or in additional articles that you might put out in the future? What's the best way to keep tabs on the great things that you're doing?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Drenten, JennaDrenten, and I will be tweeting about insights and topics along the way.
That's amazing. So definitely give her a follow. I know I'm going to give her a follow. I think I'm following you already. If I'm not, I'm about to on all of my channels. But before we end this podcast, is there any closing thoughts, advice that you would like to provide for the audience?
Yeah, I think a thing to take away is just I am very encouraged by the women that I talk to through my research, despite the negative experiences that they have had, that overwhelmingly gaming is such a healing community. It's a welcoming community. It's a place to belong and exist and behave as you want to. And I think the more that we can make that accessible to all people, the better the community will be. So I think it's a really positive time to start gaming, and if you've stopped, to get back into it.
Absolutely. So thank you again so much for your time today. Thank you everybody who tuned in to listen to this episode. Next week we have an exciting guest that will be joining us. We'll reveal that a little bit later. But in the meantime, make sure you give Jenna a follow. Make sure you follow the Knights to keep up with all the great stuff that they're doing. And in the meantime, game on, be safe, be great, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.